there has been now for, I guess, close to 9 months, 8 months, an ongoing conflict in Ukraine, as you're aware of. There was an article out today or maybe it was yesterday, where the U.S. has, and this is according to the Washington Post, has sent private warnings to Russia against using a nuclear weapon. And there's also, in the past 3 or 4 days, Putin has called up 300,000 reservists. We don't know the actual numbers that are actually going to show up, but let's just presume that's the case. And yesterday or today instituted a draft, which is on top of reservists. So you have people come in with no military expertise whatsoever. They're coming in, presumably they're getting trained, but I mean, this is a draft. And I guess from my perspective, like, and I don't know how you feel about the funding. There's tens of millions of dollars. I mean, really billions of dollars at this point. Several billions of dollars that we have at least poured into Ukraine. I guess the first thing that sort of strikes me is the United States was warning everyone that Russia was going to invade Ukraine for like a month or two in the ramp up, or maybe more. And there was a lot of skepticism about what the United States was saying. There was a lot of folks saying this is just hype. This is the U.S. trying to scare people. And in retrospect, it is clear that they were correct. And they were trying to forestall, it appears, an invasion by Russia of Ukraine. Now, regardless of where people are on how much provocation was involved in terms of NATO, to the extent that Putin was doing this because he was afraid of NATO encroachment, categorically failed strategy, right? I mean, NATO has expanded in the past 8 months by 2 countries. I'm dubious of some of the polling that has taken place around this, but I have no doubt in this country that NATO stands as popular as it has probably ever been, or darn close to it in the past like 30 years, 40 years. But I'm concerned about what's going on with this warning about nukes, because this seems to sort of be analogous to what we were seeing in the buildup before the war. The U.S. clearly has intelligence on the inside in Putin's, like, if not circle, pretty close to it. And
it's not hard to imagine that there's some disgruntled oligarchs in that circle who don't feel like they have any other option except to maybe cooperate with U.S. intelligence. I don't know.
What is your sense of all this? Because, clearly Putin is trying, at the very least, Putin is trying to signal that he is not going to end this invasion without achieving something. There's also a vote that has taken place in the Donetsk region. I don't know if it's coming today or within days, that the U.S. has dubbed and Ukraine has dubbed a sham. There's some evidence of that, but it's also very sort of hard to assess. Although I don't know what, this is obviously a non-binding referendum. But what is your sense of all this?
Well, it's hard to say. 'Cause I remember thinking about the intelligence you were talking about prior to the invasion, and I remember treating it with some skepticism too. But I think, as you say, it's certainly possible the U.S. is hearing from people who don't have, or who are trying to get a message across to Putin, and if you believe the reporting that he's sort of isolated, or he was not basically not listening to reason among the people in his government and in his circle. It's a little, I mean, I don't know. It's and we're dealing with the sort of like foreign reporting around intelligence stuff that's impossible for us to verify. So like,
Right.
who knows how seriously to take it, right? Who knows? And obviously, like, one of the themes of the last year is like, Putin is not someone who you can say credibly, I know what his plan is here. I mean, he's not like, people have the sort of madman theory, and then people have the sort of like just normal calculating guy theory, and it's sort of in his interest to toe that line. So I don't know, but I mean, I do know that this again, as you said, strategically, this has not worked out to forestall the advance of NATO. And it seems like potentially a very bad thing for an armed forces to suddenly have a ton of new recruits who don't necessarily want to be there, along with a depleted officer class because your military has not been doing very well in this war. That seems like a recipe for a not particularly disciplined fighting force. So I don't know. We'll see what happens.
I feel like we're going to have to wait for like the deep reporting on this and books that may come out over the next year or two. But it feels like, my sense was at the time that the Biden administration, at least narrowly conceived, did not want this. They did not want Russia to invade Ukraine, did not want to have a conflict with Russia. I mean, I think it's quite clear, I think the idea that it has now become of sorts a proxy war on some level, I think is accurate. But it did. My sense is it didn't start that way, that the Biden administration would not have been pouring money into Ukraine had Russia successfully, controlled X portion of Ukraine within a week or two. This did not go for Russia like Iraq did for the U.S., as protracted and as much of a disaster Iraq was. And obviously, in terms of killing, Iraq was, far more of death and destruction. But the U.S. had basically gotten control of the country relatively quick, with obviously ongoing fighting. It did not go this way for Russia. They are back-footed. They need to bring up reserves. They need to bring up a draft. I don't think anybody would have predicted this at that time. I don't even think that U.S. could have had the greatest intelligence in the world. They're not going to know more than the Russians did about their own army. And I think they're finding out that whatever was going on with their system was I don't think Putin thought it was going to go this way. I think they all thought it was going to go much easier. And I don't know that anyone could have predicted this, because I just don't know who would have had that level of intelligence. But here we are now. It is a proxy war. Russia's back-footed. And, I have a problem with the amount of money that we're pouring into Ukraine, but it's also hard to imagine that we would have provided no resources to this country when they're being invaded over such a protracted period of time. I think, if the war had ended more or less in the first week or two, I don't think we would have seen any of this. No. But Russia clearly overestimated its own capacity and underestimated Ukraine's abilities. Yeah. And so now here we are, and I don't know I don't see how this ends, frankly. Without it being a massive disaster, because it feels like Putin is, projecting I'm going down with the ship. This is not going to be there's no cutting of losses here.
Yeah. And I think that's right. I think that if they had gone in and basically toppled the government in Ukraine and installed someone friendly to Moscow,
which seemed to be the agenda.
That seemed to be the plan. And I think they thought I think that would be a fairly quick and relatively easy thing to do. And then having established those facts on the ground, I think you're right. This would be done. I don't think we would be seeing, the conflict would not have, there would have been conflict, but it wouldn't have been this sort of extended war. But yeah, this is a problem. Is that I mean, I don't see a way out of this that doesn't involve, that doesn't involve Putin basically completely changing everything he has stated as his objectives in waging this war.
Or if he's ousted or something, because these look, that seems far-fetched, and I don't know what the situation is on the ground domestically in Russia, but these images from these anti-war protests, that's just going to get louder and louder if the reservists continue to get called up, and if, then we're not just in, partial
I don't think there are any more reservists to be called up. I think the 300,000 was that's it. And now we're drafting people. And that seems to be regardless of how isolated folks are in Russia from news out of Ukraine, it's not hard to sort of make the assessment that wait a second, 9 months into this, we're doing a draft. That doesn't that's not supposed to work that way. And I don't know, 9 months into the Iraq war, you remember this, Alex, you'd be hard pressed. Well, maybe 16 months into the Iraq war, you'd be hard pressed to walk around the United States and have any level of awareness that we were engaged in a war, killing hundreds of thousands of people, displacing literally millions of people. For the most part, by the time you get around 2004, there's anti-war sentiment, and but by the time you get to 2006, and it was more or less it just is nobody's paying attention to it, and certainly the American public. I would say the awareness of how many billions of dollars that we've sent to Ukraine has got to be incredibly small. The concern about it has got to be even smaller, I would imagine, because the number of people who actually think it's something we shouldn't do, I think, is also pretty infinitesimally small. So there's really very little incentive for the West to stop funding Ukraine. And for the most part, there's every indication that if you were able to hold a referendum in Ukraine, the Ukrainians want that money and those weapons. They're not ready to capitulate. If they were, I don't think this war would have gone on for 9 months, regardless of how much weaponry you pour in there. And so I just don't see how this ends.
Yeah. We don't seem remotely close to any sort of negotiated settlement here. That doesn't seem to be a thing that is at hand, right? And the deal, like you said, sort of when the U.S. was waging war in Iraq, the deal in Putin's Russia for a long time was, the Moscow elite and the middle class didn't really have to pay attention to what his government was doing out in the rest of the world. They could just sort of, they didn't have to suffer the negative consequences of it. And so, I don't know, if you're seeing a draft and you're seeing these ongoing sanctions that are designed or intended to sort of topple the Russian economy, it is eventually going to be something that is harder to notice and endure for, for normal Russians who otherwise are, I think, pretty used to living under Putin without having to sort of worry about what he's up to. So I don't know.
Well, it's the nuclear weapon thing is disturbing because again, there's a reason why, you know, the Washington Post story says the United States for several months have been sending private communications to Moscow. Now that we know about this, now that somebody has decided that we should know about this, it's concerning.
Yes,
I mean,
I
that's
agree.
like that's the part that really concerns me.